everyone, Amy here, checking in midweek for week 10. I'm doing this a little bit early this week because our Westminster and Boulder County students already completed week 10 last week, so I want to give them some stuff before they start revising their final drafts of the summary response essay, and it just works a little bit better for my schedule this week to do it today. So first I want to recap our week 9 quiz, which was over semicolons. This was kind of our lowest scoring quiz of the semester. The average, I think, was about a 72, but that also could be due to the fact that there were only 5 questions, so it kind of weighed each of the questions a little bit more heavily, and so you didn't have as many opportunities to bring up your grade with some of the other questions that you might have gotten right. But you can see there were 2 big standouts here. Everyone did pretty average or so on 2, 3, and 4, but questions 1 and 5 were more troubling. 1 is one that you just kind of have to memorize as far as a rule for semicolons, when it's appropriate to use a semicolon and when you would want to use a colon instead. So, of course, our primary use for semicolons is to join 2 independent clauses or 2 sentences that could stand on their own. This is what we mean when we say semicolons can stand in for periods. Periods and semicolons do the same thing. You just don't want to have semicolon after semicolon after semicolon. You kind of can only use a semicolon once before you need a period to really stop the reader and move them on to something else. On the other hand, there is another less known use for semicolons, which is to use them as what I like to call kind of big commas, to separate items in a list when the items in the list are phrases or multiple words that might contain their own punctuation, particularly commas, because normally you'd have commas in between the items in a list of 3, but if some of those items have commas within themselves, that can start to be really confusing which commas refer to which thing, and so separating each of the items in the list with semicolons instead is in fact an appropriate use for a semicolon. So B and C were our correct answers here. And then I'll just point out that anytime you're introducing a list or a quotation or introducing something in general, that's going to be the use for a colon instead of a semicolon, as is separating a main title and a subtitle, which is kind of the same thing. More or less, you're using the title to introduce the subtitle. So anytime you're introducing something, that's going to be a colon instead. So again, this is just something you have to memorize, these general rules of when to use a semicolon versus when to use a colon. And then once you have the rules memorized, then you can start to practice with actually applying that to different examples. And that can be more or less tricky depending how difficult the example is. But if you don't have the rules solid in your mind in the first place, it's going to be difficult to apply the rule to an example. So try to memorize these as much as you can. And then question 5, when I was looking at this, I thought, you know, this is really a confusing question. I think in the future I'm going to change this one, so it doesn't surprise me at all that you guys got hung up on this one. So I think what I'm going to do is just go in and give everyone points for this, because even the answer is kind of confusing because it's telling you that B and C are both correct. He could have used a period instead. He could have used a comma instead. In fact, this is a complete sentence, an independent clause. It's kind of confusing why it is, because the subject of the sentence is in the form of a preposition, which is extremely rare and something that I have talked on and on about how the subject can never appear in a prepositional phrase. So we do have 2 independent clauses, but the first one is very tricky in terms of being able to tell that being able to be able to, that's kind of a participle form of a verb, of a noun, and so it's difficult to see that as the subject of the sentence. It's really the being able to part that makes the subject, but that is just a really tricky example. So, you know, technically you wouldn't want to choose both of these things, but that's what it's saying is the right answer. So basically this question is just really messed up, and I'm going to go in and give everyone points for this one. So I'm sorry about the confusion there, and just remember that semicolons are used to separate 2 independent clauses, and I know that one was tricky for you all. Okay, so let's go on to your week 9 journal. which was asking you to separate your close and critical reading. This is really, really important because it's something I'm noticing you struggling with, particularly in the discussions that we've completed recently. So I really wanted to put you through the process of physically separating your close reading of the text from your critical reading of the text, which is why I was asking you to do that in the double entry format. But here's a really particularly in-depth example. I thought that these notes were ones that this student would be able to go back and use really easily when writing the essay, because it's not just 1 or 2 words in each item, it's actually a full-on explanation of what the student was thinking at the time that they took these notes. So this is definitely summary here. Angela noticed that she studied, it's all about things from the article that she said. Duckworth goes on to tell us, etc., etc. And so these are definitely close reading notes over here. And then over here you can see the word I coming up. So we know that these are going to be the students' own ideas and their own kind of critical responses to the individual close reading points that were on the left-hand side. So I agree with this. I have also experienced that with my own peers. I mean, this is a really good example of something that can go directly into one of those body of the response paragraphs in the actual summary and response essay, because that's where you'll have to pull in examples not only from the text but from your own life to illustrate why you agree or disagree. Similar down here where the writer says, I trust her and her studies, but I would like to see what data she is referring to. These are, of course, the writer's own ideas, and we know that because they're saying I. And it's okay to use that pronoun I in your summary and response essay, at least in the response portion, because you are giving your own ideas and your own reactions to the text. I just want to point out, though, that these next 2 items are actually more close reading and should go on the left-hand side. So Duckworth's definition of grit is she believes that, she brings up in this article and thinks the concept is fundamental, etc., etc. So these are only things that Duckworth says, so they should actually go on the other side. But then again, we go back to this person's critical evaluation of those ideas. I think Duckworth is valid. So anytime you're talking about yourself, your own reactions to the text, what you thought about the text, that's going to go in your critical area here, and it would go in the response portion of your essay. Whereas anytime you're summarizing, anytime you're just saying what the author has said, that's going to go here on the left-hand side, things that would go into your summary, of course. But you could also pull them in as examples in the response portion of your essay of what the writer said that you're responding to. But for the sake of this particular assignment, I was looking to have them separated completely. Now, I also asked you to write a little reflective paragraph where you talked about what the process was like for you, and I got various things across the board. I think most of you said you're still struggling with this, which is why I'm going to talk about it so much today. But this person said, in my opinion, I think that close note-taking was a little easier than the critical because of the actual fact versus thoughts. I did realize that noting between the 2 was very tedious because of the actual thought that I had to examine. Although it was time-consuming, I did get a better understanding of the article after dissecting each paragraph. I do see that I may have to break down my thoughts on the article a bit more. I think I will use this exercise toward my summary essay by persuading my audience in the events that occurred in the article. So I just want to point out that these 2 are not from the same student, so this paragraph is not necessarily referring to what was written in this journal over here. But I did like what this writer had to say about how it is kind of tedious to go through paragraph by paragraph and indicate what the writer has said versus what you thought about that. But it does give you a better understanding, and then, as this person says, more material to use when writing the actual summary and response essay. So if you struggled with this journal last week, and I did give each of you individualized feedback, I would encourage you to go back and maybe do it again as a pre-writing exercise for your draft of the summary and response essay. Like if you are writing your draft and you think, wow, this is really short, I don't know what to say here, I don't have enough to write about, go back and redo your double entry journal with the article that you're going to be summarizing and responding to in order to mine the text for a few more ideas of things that you might talk about in your actual essay. And so that brings me to your actual rough draft of the essay, which is due in discussions tonight. A few of you, though, have already turned them in because, like I said, our Boulder County and Westminster folks did this assignment last week because they're on spring break right now. And then at least one of you, Cindy, has already turned in yours. So thanks, Cindy, for being on top of that. I did notice in your week 9 posts, which were meant to be organizing your points for the response portion of your essay, that a lot of the points you all identified there were still summary. So again, this is something I just really want to emphasize, the distinction between the two, summarizing what the writer has said versus what you thought about it or your reactions to what the writer has said. Cindy's was one that I do see is still struggling with that quite a bit. So Scott's going to review her essay, of course, and Scott usually gives really good feedback, so I have no worries there. But I do want to point out that while Cindy has a really good introduction, she does introduce the article and go into the summary portion of the essay right there. That's really about all we get. Dweck goes on to talk about, she does say, I agree with this point here, but that's kind of the extent of this paragraph itself, and I can't see anywhere where Cindy sums up all of her response points in a thesis after the summary portion of the essay. So really what you want to do is go from your intro into a paragraph or two of summary, then give us your thesis that comprises all of your response points, and then break down each of those points more in depth. So she says, I agree here. She does say, I do not agree down here. But again, these response points are coming as kind of an afterthought because the majority of the paragraph is comprised of summary. So you'd kind of want to reverse this structure to say what you agreed and disagreed with first at the beginning of those response paragraphs, and then you can fill in with, like I said, examples from the text, but also examples from your own life. And then you would also sum up each of these points in a thesis of your own at the beginning of the response portion of the essay, where you would give us all of those points in order, and then you can go on to break them down further. And then I'll also just point out that most of what's written throughout the remainder here is actually summary as well. So even though we get a couple of agree and disagree points in these paragraphs toward the ends of those paragraphs where they were originally here, still the vast majority of this is really just summary. And remember that the summary portion actually should only be about a third of the essay, whereas the response altogether should be about 2/3. And then while you do have a good start to your works cited here, Cindy, it does need to be at the top of its own page. Dweck's last name comes first, so it'd be Dweck, Carroll. Then you'd need the book title that this came from. You can find all of this on the assignment sheet. And then you'd need the date, I think it's 2009 or something like that, and then the URL at the end. So just to be a little more in line with MLA. Also make sure that you are not including all of the information on these 4 lines within your header. You really only want your header to be your last name and the page number, because that's going to show up on every single page. And then you would just include those 4 things on the first page, and that way they don't take up space at the top of every page. So just a couple nitpicky things there toward the end, but this is the first essay where you've really had to apply MLA in terms of citations, so you want to make sure you have all that stuff in order. On the other hand, I think we can look at Danica's essay, which was posted last week because she's on spring break right now, as another example of something that's a little bit closer to what the assignment sheet is asking for. So she's definitely got the formatting down here, except she still needs to add her header at the top, just her last name there. And then she's got a title, but I would like to see the title be something different than what the article title itself is. You know, you could say summary and response to the 10,000 hour rule, and then article titles always go in quotes, and if you do have the book title in there, that would be italicized. Danica has a really good intro where she just kind of sets up the situation or the issue at hand being discussed. She doesn't give any summary. She doesn't introduce the article yet, but it just kind of hooks the reader's interest and tells us what she's going to be talking about. Then she goes on to introduce the article, just missing a little bit of publication information there, where it was published and when. Then goes on to summarize in a paragraph or so. I would say this is a little bit too reliant on specific examples from the text, but Danica, you could revise just by saying what points Gladwell was using these examples to support. So what point is he trying to make with Mozart? What point is he trying to make with the Beatles? And that way you'll get a better representation of his article for someone who hasn't read it, and give us more of his ideas than just simply giving us the examples can do. But then from there, the response portion goes on with what we have here in terms of her response thesis. You can see this is just a short transitional paragraph between the summary and the response portion of the essay. She does say it's overall accurate. She agrees with the 10,000 hour rule, but she doesn't believe a skill comes naturally. It takes years of hard work, which is actually another agree point. Then we do have a paragraph here of summary. It's mostly summary. She does say, I can't think of any professional that hasn't done that at least. I think you need a stronger topic sentence here, Danica, just to introduce this paragraph so that you aren't starting it with summary, because again, you want these response paragraphs to be focused on response, not summary, so start with your response there. And then you could give maybe a couple more examples from your own life, but you do a good job bringing in an example from Gladwell here. For MLA, you don't need to include the abbreviation PG, just the name and the page number, and then make sure that the period comes after the parenthetical, not before. So here's another example of where you're starting out a response paragraph with summary. So instead of summarizing, you would want to give us a topic sentence here. Now, I don't think that this point is actually previewed in your response thesis, because this is a paragraph about the series of events that allows someone to reach that 10,000 hour number. And I don't see anything about a series of events here in the thesis, so you would maybe just want to add a preview of that point here in your response thesis, as well as a topic sentence, something like, I agree with Gladwell that a fortunate series of events is necessary to reach the 10,000 hour number, or something like that. And then you would put, like I said, that back in your thesis. And then last, he says it takes preparation for skill, which I agree with them 100%. This is a much stronger topic sentence, very similar to how you previewed that point in your response thesis at the beginning of this section of your essay. And then again, I would say that pretty much all you need to add in here are maybe some examples from your own life to show why you feel that this is true, why you're inclined to agree with it. And then we have a conclusion here that recaps the agree points, the 10,000 hours, the series of events, and the preparation. So a pretty good job summing up here at the end. Danica, all you're missing then is your works cited page. And then we also got an example from Isaac, who also is on spring break this week, but I'll just go ahead and show you where he did a lot of the same things, but his response paragraphs are just a little bit out of order. So he's got another really strong introduction, great job with formatting. All of this looks good, except I would say make your title something different than the title of the article itself, or build on that and then put the article title in quotes. He introduces the title at the beginning of his summary, but you also need the where it was published and when. And then goes into summary there. Now, this innate talent issue is still one that I think a lot of people are getting hung up on. He actually does not believe in innate talent, even though he says the obvious answer to the talent question is yes. He goes right on after that to say the problem with this view ... So it's showing that he actually does not agree with it. Then again, you also want to include your parentheticals within the sentence itself. So put the period after the parenthetical and omit the abbreviation PG. And then you'll have a pretty good summary here that maybe still is a little too heavily reliant on examples like the Beatles. And as I said before, I'd like to see this focus a little more on the points that he's using these examples like the Beatles and Mozart to illustrate, as opposed to just talking about the examples themselves. But then we go straight into Isaac's response thesis, which is very strong. So Gladwell discusses how innate talent is achieved through preparation. Again, there's a little bit of misunderstanding there, but he says, I agree skill takes preparation, but I don't think it takes 10,000 hours, and I don't think it takes a series of events. So, so then we go into a point about a series of events. This really, to me, sounds more like summary. Which is fine. I think it just needs to be moved up before the response thesis, because all of this stuff comes from the article. It's not really Isaac's own ideas. So that's one place where the organization could be a little tighter here. Then we get skill needing preparation to be successful, and that seems like it is his first point from the response thesis, so this would match up a little bit better. I would say maybe this is a great opportunity to use a semicolon so that you are getting your response point into the first sentence of the paragraph here, introducing that response at the top in the topic sentence of the paragraph to keep the focus on your response. And then the next point should be, I don't agree that it takes 10,000 hours. But I don't think you can put a number on how much you need. Again, a semicolon might be more appropriate here, or you could reverse the order of this by pulling this response sentence to the beginning, and you could just say, I agree to a point that for any skill you do need to practice, but I don't think you can put a number on it, and then go on. Again, Isaac, you probably need to bring in some examples from your own life. And then maybe another semicolon here, just so that your agree point is in the topic sentence, and then fill it in with examples from your own life and the article. Then you're still missing a conclusion, Isaac, so make sure you add that in. And then again, for the works cited page, you do need to include the book title and the date. I think this one is 2010. And the URL. And then it would get a hanging indent. You go to your paragraph box, and under indentation where it says special, select hanging, and then move this to the top of its own page. All right, so overall though, I think these are off to a good start. You know, obviously they're in various stages of readiness. But these are all things that you could be looking for as you're providing feedback to one another. And then I also want to say, don't forget that there are two parts to the feedback you need to provide to your group members. You need to provide a copy of the draft with in-text line-by-line comments, and then also do that workshop worksheet that's in the week 10 content under discussion. So Isaac already did that for Danica. He did a really good job. So if you're wondering what you need to do for your homework in terms of the feedback, you can look at Isaac's example, and the depth of his feedback is definitely what we're looking for. So that's a great model for the rest of you to follow. Okay, so in the interest of making sure we're all on the same page in terms of what you need to do before you turn in those rough drafts, let's go ahead and take a look at the assignment sheet for the essay once more. So you'll see here that you guys are pretty much all the way through the steps. You've read the article closely and critically. The plan for your paper here is what I want you to follow in terms of an outline. So this will show you how to provide an introduction, make sure that your summary is only about a third of the essay, then present your response thesis, then include each point from your response thesis in separate body paragraphs in order. Begin each paragraph with a topic sentence that states why you agree or disagree with the article, and then fill in with examples. And these could come from your own personal life, as I've said, and from the article itself, and then wrap up with a conclusion. So once you have those ideas for what your response points are going to be, you can solidify them into your thesis, agree, disagree, or agree, or whatever it might be. And then again, make sure you have strong topic sentences for each of those. You can see that broken down in the strategies section as well. So again, your summary should just be about a third of the essay, not the entire essay. And then how to introduce the article, how to focus on the overall argument and the summary and not give specific evidence or examples like the Beatles or Mozart, but instead what were the points that the author was using those examples to support. Then give us a 1 or 2 sentence thesis statement of your own to transition into the response portion of your essay. And then that response overall should be about 2/3 of the essay, following along with the response thesis in order in body paragraphs. Where do you agree and disagree? Talk about things from your own life, but also discuss the article. Use attributive tags throughout so it's clear when you're talking about the article versus when you're talking about your own life, and make sure you have those MLA conventions followed as well. And then you can see those are all the things that you're going to be graded on in the essay as well. How well you have focused on the overall argument in your summary instead of specific examples and evidence. How well you have focused on things you agreed and disagreed with in your response. How well you're bringing in examples from the article through quote and paraphrase, and how well you're organizing those response paragraphs as well as the overall essay in terms of your intro, your summary, the entire response, and your conclusion. And then the MLA conventions, of course, are important as well. So if you still have questions about the assignment itself, please email me as soon as possible, because I don't want you to get too much farther in drafting the essay with those questions still in mind. All right, so let's take a look at your homework for the weekend. Of course, most of you have not yet posted your rough draft to the workshop, so those are due tonight at midnight, so make sure you get that up there by that deadline. Then you do have to do your feedback to one group member by doing the in-text comments and the worksheet by midnight on Friday, and then your reflection for Sunday night should include your plans for revision. Also, make sure that you're doing Journal 10 first, because that will help you develop your ideas for the body paragraphs in the response portion of your essay. So it'll give you stuff to write about in your paragraphs so that you will have some stuff to work with to actually draft the essay. Your grammar work for this week has to do with apostrophes, and then Matt, for your student success assignment, would like you to send your draft into the online writing center. Make sure you do that as soon as possible, like at the same time tonight when you post it to the workshop discussion area. Go ahead and send it into the writing center so that they have time to give you feedback. It usually takes 24 to 48 hours. And then once you have that feedback, then you'll be able to complete the actual assignment in time for Sunday night's deadline. So if you have questions about any of this stuff, of course, please let me know. And otherwise, I look forward to reading the rest of your rough drafts over the next few days. Thank you so much.